might be the only person in the world who enjoys icebreakers. And while this is obviously pre-recorded and I cannot ask or rather torture you for a show of hands, I know that I don't actually need to because we're all feeling burnout as humans right now. It is pretty much inevitable. If you were sitting watching a conference through a Zoom, you're probably a little burnt out. But we're also feeling burnout as brands, as it's increasingly difficult to maintain performance, momentum, and brand resonance today with everything that's going on in the market. So the answer, similar to human burnout, lies in taking a step back, rethinking our mindset, and turning to the natural world, which is the focus of my talk today. Hello, everyone. I'm Val Nguyen. Over the years, I've worked as a strategist in many capacities, from creative to innovation to brand, and I've taught in graduate design thinking programs. I've worked with mega brands like Nike, like Google, as well as startups looking to take their businesses to the next level. And currently, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Decoded Advertising. Decoded is a full funnel marketing, advertising, and design company born of and for a new era. We create breakthrough ideas with unrivaled performance by challenging convention with a new way of working that decodes the connections between consumers, creativity, and commerce. And we are a part of Media Monks, a global company that also aims to reinvent with an innovative single P&L model that offers our clients seamless access to multidisciplinary talent. And it's through these two new operating models that we're able to bring to life the philosophy that I'm going to talk about today. So here we've got it, the big talk, evolving advertising, how brands solve design problems by leveraging biomimicry and insights from nature. So as I mentioned earlier, times are tough right now. Competition is getting steeper. We're operating in environments that are increasingly diverse, interconnected, and therefore complex. And the global pandemic that we're still in the midst of is an example of the rise of unexpected black swan events. So for brands, it's survival of the fittest right now. And the challenge is that we must both drive performance in the near term while also building for the long term. So we have to push our brands. We have to push beyond optimization because media optimizations can only get us so far. The real opportunity lies in creative. What we've seen in aggregate across our work with clients is that creative can account for as much of a 75% performance gain. Brands need to embrace creative leaps that set them up to survive today and thrive tomorrow. So here we are, we're on the edge of a precipice. We need to take an evolutionary leap forward in how we think about driving performance and ultimately building brands. So in order to explore what's next, let's first look back on where we've come from. So we're going to take a very, very abbreviated, very much overly simplified tour of the evolution of advertising with a focus on how the available communication technologies shaped advertising at different points in time. So our first stop, we'll start way back, very, very far back to ancient China, where the earliest advertising known appeared somewhere between the 11th and 7th centuries BC as a purely oral tradition. Fast forward to the year 1000, and we get the world's first identified print ad, which was for a needle shop, which you can see here. And what defines this era is its limits. With primitive communication technologies, the scale of advertising happened at that micro community level. Then fast forward through many centuries of world history, and we get to the broadcast age where we get mass communication channels like radio and television. The means of content creation are still limited by expense, by access to content creation tools. And so our communication landscape is defined by a one-to-many orientation, and advertising, of course, follows suit. Brands broadcasting their messages to the masses. Then, of course, we reach the digital age. While it's been brewing for decades with the democratization of communication tools, namely the internet, it was only a few years ago that advertisers spent more on digital than they did on traditional TV. And what's most exciting about our current age, beyond the ability to have dancing robots at halftime football games now, is that we're now at a point where tech has enabled us to radicalize our approach. Channels have proliferated, giving us more levers to pull. Data has become democratized, unlocking the power of feedback loops for organizations at any size. And production capabilities have expanded, allowing us to create more quickly, especially when you throw in the boost of AI-assisted creativity. However, there's a catch. As progress goes, the solutions also bring new problems. there's too much clutter. We're drowning in data without meaningful insight. It's harder to reach audiences meaningfully as we are competing with people as much as we're trying to actually reach them. So while tech can and will enable us forward, it isn't fully the answer. So as much as we're struggling today, we're trying to, stop thumbs and social feeds and whatnot, bemoaning the challenges that we have at hand, we have to remember that this isn't an entirely new challenge. Natural ecosystems and the evolutionary processes that underpin them have enabled life to flourish through eons of competition, complexity, and chaos. So we're going to take inspiration from nature, and there's actually a name for this, and it's called biomimicry. And biologist Janine Benes put it much better than I will, but this respectful imitation is a radically new approach that is nothing short of revolutionary. So to illustrate biomimicry, there's actually many examples, some of which you might actually come across in your daily life. Let's start with probably the most wide-scale one, and that's Velcro. Velcro was invented by somebody who went for a walk with their dog and came back to find that their dog was covered in little plant burrs. And so they took the inspiration, having looked at these burrs under a microscope, of creating the adhesive that we know today. The second example, really smart solve for the problem of the sonic booms that were happening because of Japan's bullet trains speeding through stations so quickly. Engineers looked at kingfisher birds, which are birds that are able to dive into water at high speeds with hardly a splash. And so they reshaped the nose of the bullet train to mimic the beak of the bird. And then finally, automakers who borrowed from the wisdom and the structure of spider webs to create windshields that crack but do not shatter. So let's apply this thinking to the problem at hand. In order to survive and thrive, brands need to operate like ecological systems, embracing an evolutionary mindset and evolutionary processes. So to illustrate what that actually means, and to give you some actionable food for thought, we're going to look at 5 key principles to embodying this next era inspired way of building brands and businesses, each, of course, illustrated by an inspiration from the natural world. So this first principle might make you a little uncomfortable, and not just because you might be afraid of snakes, and we'll find out why in a second. But snakes have evolved to shed their skin. Most of us know that. Their skins cannot stretch, so as they grow, they need to make room for themselves. Similarly, as marketers and advertisers, we need to shed and unlearn old mindsets, especially as a strategist. I've been trained to always have the answer. And while, of course, we develop expertise over time, and if I do say so myself, I oftentimes feel like I do have the answer, we operate in the realm of creativity. That means that there's always the opportunity to be surprised. So we need to shed the hubris of feeling like we always know best to make room for the surprising leaps that can unlock performance and brand growth. So to illustrate this, earlier this year, we ran a campaign focused on combating COVID vaccine hesitancy. In addition to releasing over 300 creative experiments into the wild, we also polled over 40 marketing professionals, all our friends at the top agencies out there. We spoke to clients as well. And we asked them to, from these different pieces of creative, select which they thought would perform best. Surprisingly, the 2 ads most selected as top performers were actually the worst 2 performing ads of the entire campaign. So it just goes to show that oftentimes we don't actually know, and we have to make room for those surprises that will actually build our brands. So our second principle takes inspiration from the Yellowstone ecosystem, where the importance of biodiversity has been highlighted by the reintroduction of the gray wolf, which was hunted to near extermination earlier in the 1900s. There's actually some pretty amazing YouTube videos about this if you want to go deeper, but the reintroduction of the gray wolf, which happened about 25 years ago at this point, has had wide-ranging impacts. It stabilized elk populations. It fostered healthier tree stands. It restored bird migratory patterns. All this to underscore that healthy ecosystems require rich biodiversity with many species playing different interrelated roles. So this brings us to our second principle, which is all about radically embracing variance. Now, this can be hard. This idea of variance can be very hard after years of being trained against this idea that our brands need to be really consistent. Sometimes people say things like matching luggage. However, people are able to express themselves in more multifaceted ways than ever. Why can't brands do so as well? So similar to an ecological system, increasing diversity of creative expression actually increases the health of the brand. When we look at our work in aggregate across our clients, again, we've seen that brands can expect a 2x return on ROI testing when we do 10 diverse creatives compared to 2. Now, the key thing to remember here is that these pieces of creative have to be actually distinct from one another. When they're just iterations, slight variations, that average lift decreases to just 27%. So more variance is better. And that increase in variance in that brand expression increases your opportunities to resonate with audiences. And by prototyping and then scaling what works, you can fortify your brand against shifts in the market, shifts in channels, as well as changes in people's preferences. So let me introduce you to the majestic octopus. You can see here, this octopus is actually dreaming. So we're seeing a bit of like a REM sleep moment with all these different color changes. But while octopuses might not have bones, they don't have a hard shell for protection, they do have something that's really amazing. And that is thousands of color changing cells called chromatophores, which enable them infinite possibilities when it comes to expressing color on their skin. So we scientists originally thought that this was purely used for camouflage, and there's many videos and GIFs out there where you can see an octopus just absolutely disappear by changing its skin. However, they've also evolved to use these color changes for communication. And scientists have recently hypothesized that this enables actually a pretty rich social life. And over time, they've experimented with different patterns, different colors to figure out the best way to engage a mate or maybe even fight off a rival. So that brings us to our third principle. This one actually builds on our previous principle, this idea of iterating forward by designing to learn, because variance means nothing if you're not leveraging it. And so that's why it's critical to actually think through as you put anything out into the world, as you want to try anything, like, what am I actually going to learn from this? What are the decisions that I'm going to be able to make based off of the insights of how well this dimension, which is maybe it's strategic, maybe it's creative, how well that performs. So in the same way that octopuses experiment to understand what best engages or conceals, every interaction with your brand, every piece of creative is an opportunity to not just understand what works, but more importantly, to understand why things work. And doing so, you're able to do two things. One, you can achieve immediate performance. You're putting out that variance, you're increasing your chances of finding something that's really going to resonate. But also what this enables you to do, and this gets back to the why things work, you can develop audience insights that have longer term insights and implications to other areas of your business. So rather than relying on generalized best of practices, which are useful, but maybe not always bulletproof, you can actually develop your own. And we do this with all of our clients, exploring different, as I mentioned, creative dimensions, strategic dimensions, media dimensions, et cetera, to iterate and innovate campaigns and strategies. So I feel like all these examples are my favorite, but trees are really having a moment right now. If you haven't read Overstory by Richard Powers, highly recommend that. But we've made some really interesting strides in understanding trees. And we know now that if a tree falls in a forest, as the old saying goes, and nobody's around, all of the surrounding trees might not hear it, but they will feel it. And that's because there are underground fungal networks that allow trees to communicate with one another, share resources, and constantly collect data from different sources. So similar to forests, our fourth principle is we need to build a system of feedback loops. We need to build brands with not just singular loops, but layers of loops that allow us to get a holistic understanding of the threats and the opportunities. It's about varied inputs, not just performance data, although obviously performance data is really powerful, but also deep insights into culture and people. And by bringing together these different types of insights, you can build and support brand platforms. So take, for example, our Money is Changing campaign for Visa, which challenged both the notion of how to show up as an innovative brand, as well as the cultural taboo for women when it comes to talking about money. Born from that cultural insight, we then used experimentation, we injected variants out into the world to get smarter over time and evolve the campaign across both channels and years. So our final principle, a little bit similar to the first in spirit, slightly more emotional, and it takes inspiration from the bravery of these little wood ducklings that you're seeing here. These ducklings, they hatch up in nests that are over 30 feet in the air, and eventually they grow up and they have to take an instinctual leap of faith to drop all the way down, 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 down to the ground. So this last principle serves as a reminder to merge your array of insights with instinct. As much as we've talked a lot about how we don't know everything, we also need to remember that gut, sometimes that's where the creative magic comes from. So as much as we should gather input about our environment with all of our different senses, we also need to listen to those gut instincts when it comes to that creative expression. And of course, this works perfectly with an ecosystem approach that has the space for creative risks as well as optimized iterations. So for example, I think we could all close our eyes. If I asked you to imagine a campaign focused on retirees, we'd probably all say, oh, there's probably some older people, probably maybe they're like holding hands with their loved one and they're on a beach with the sunrise, right? Which is great, which is smart, which is rational, which makes sense, right? We all dream for, kind of that time where we can finally take the time for ourselves. However, everyone does that. And so we had an inkling to actually go against that. And we took a creative leap of faith based on the intuition that maybe we could create a world that is fantastical, almost psychedelic, which is animated, very different from the traditional approach. And while we ran both, we weren't saying, hey, we know it's right, we're only going to do this. We ended up being right. That approach actually drove 225% performance gain. So in summary, I want to share one final piece of inspiration from the natural world to bring it all together. And it might be the most, I don't know, the octopus example might give it a run for its money, but it might be the most visually arresting and almost magical looking. What you can see here on the slide is a flock of starlings engaging in what is called murmuration. And I mean, honestly, it's mesmerizing to watch. This is also highly documented if you want to check it out a little bit more. But this flocking was so beautiful and seemingly coordinated that it was once, back in the 1930s, but it was once theorized that these birds did this with psychic powers. Like how else could they form these really beautiful swirls and whirls in the sky? Since then, science has revealed how it happens, and it comes down to this. It comes down to simple rules generating complex patterns. Specific to this example, they found that starlings match their direction and speed based off the nearest 7 or so neighbors. So they're not trying to take it all in and respond to the movements of all the birds in the flock, but really just focusing on those nearby birds and applying some really simple rules. And out of that emerges the phenomenon that we see here. So we talked about 5 different principles today, all inspired by the evolutionary mechanisms that yield flourishing ecosystems. In a way, those 5 principles are our simple rules. And out of those simple rules can emerge beautiful, creative brands that are multidimensional, adaptive, and self-sustaining. So in closing, I'd be remiss not to bring it back full circle to burnout. Thank you so much for your precious time today. And remember that you are like a plant. You need sunlight, you need water. So be sure to drink water and try and take a walk in the sunshine. Thank you.